Hello, I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to The Heartbeat, the place where I talk about just a few of the things that make this little guy tick. Today, I'm going to be talking about Steven Spielberg's Bridge of Spies. Join me, won't you? So, Bridge of Spies chronicles the true life story of James B. Donovan, a rather tenacious insurance lawyer who has been tasked with representing the Soviet spy, Rudolf Abel, back in 1957, kind of at the height of the Cold War. And along the way, not only does he broker deals and orchestrate prisoner exchanges and defend a wife and family, he kind of stands up for and represents things as iconic as truth, justice, and the American way. Now, I gotta tell you guys, straight off the bat, even considering talking about Spielberg or his filmography or even looking at one of his films is kind of an overwhelming task. There is such an embarrassment of riches, so many things to talk about, so many things to compliment, so many things to parse through. So I figured I would do the extremely foolish thing and try and kind of summarize, in my opinion anyways, a couple of the reasons why we find Spielberg films so iconic and return to them time and again. So one of the reasons why I feel like Spielberg is as iconic and as prolific as he is his goal in filmmaking. And two, it's how he goes about achieving that goal. And that goal is, as he stated in an interview one time, my job is to put the audience in the movie, to reduce the aesthetic difference between the audience and the experience, so that they're lost in that film for those 2 hours. And then two, it's about how he goes about achieving that goal. And time again, we've seen Spielberg choose topics, themes, characters that are really near and dear to his heart. And so near and dear that it feels like the images and the ideas are kind of just spilling off the screen into our eyes and into our hearts. So whether it's the sense of wonder that's in the night sky, or the devastation of a divorce, or the joys and struggles in parenting, or the love of a father that's endured the war, or even his heritage and nationality. He tells all these stories from such a personal point of view that it's almost impossible to distance yourself and not become empathetically involved in them. And I love reading about things like the making of Saving Private Ryan and that opening scene on Normandy where they storm the beach. Spielberg actually didn't storyboard a single frame of that opening sequence. He would instead show up each day and allow that scene and allow that moment to dictate where he put the camera, where he told the actors to look, when he chose to cut wide on the Allies being mowed down, or a close-up on Tom Hanks' face as he feels utterly shell-shocked. And all the while, Spielberg is just dipping into that well of knowledge that he's accrued over the years, whether it be through talking to veterans or reading books on the event. He's just kind of allowing each of those things to pour out of him so naturally and so organically, and he almost does it in this kind of stream of consciousness way that when we as the audience view it, it feels so truthful and so honest, and we suspend our disbelief and buy into the world that he's creating. And it really is cool reading these interviews from Spielberg all the way back in the 80s where he talks about taking these intentional kind of hiatuses from filmmaking, time to allow himself to live life and experience new things and accrue new thoughts and new ideas and new images and new characters, so he can fill himself up on those things and then, once again, naturally allow that to spill out of him to us, his audience. And thank goodness for those hiatuses, and thank goodness for that outlook and willingness to live life, because without it, I don't think we would have gotten films like Lincoln or Bridge of Spies. And I actually really do feel like there's a lot of similarities between Lincoln and Bridge of Spies as far as the specific challenges that they presented to Spielberg as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, and just the challenge of bringing the audience into that story and seeing it from the right point of view and in the right way. Because in both situations, we have these very extraordinary circumstances being navigated by these very extraordinary characters. So for instance, on Lincoln, we have an American icon. We have Abraham Lincoln. There really aren't many more American presidents that are so iconic in what they stood for and how they stood for it. And with James B. Donovan from Bridge of Spies, though I had never heard his name prior to this film, the principles on which he stood and the way he went about fighting for them was just so blindingly brilliant in their iconicness. Those being truth, justice, and the American way. One misstep from the actors or the director or the writers, things could have easily fallen into sentimentality or completely unrelatable caricature. And it's that very same tightrope that Spielberg walks so perfectly on both of those films. And on one side, it's kind of over-sensationalizing things, and on the other, it's treating things so realistically and grinding them so much that they become boring. And what's so beautifully fascinating now is I look back on both of those films and think, A, about 90% of both of those films were dialogue scenes, just between two or more characters. But then B, I actually remember specific dialogue scenes and specific beats in those dialogue scenes. And it wasn't all just a blur of talking heads. And I think that really does come from the fact that Spielberg realizes there are more tools in his toolbox than just good performances from solid actors. And it's not even just the fact that Spielberg can frame and block a scene like nobody else in this business, which is impossibly hard, by the way. And I'm not just speaking from personal experience. You look at actually certain Spielberg films and certain Spielberg moments, and the blocking and the framing doesn't quite add up. The beat doesn't quite work as effortlessly or appear as natural as it should be. But when it does work, it just it blows your mind. If only because you don't notice it until like the fourth time you watch it, or if you're a complete nerd like me and you're just like, the shot's still going. But when you watch it pan with these characters, and then push into that close-up, and then pull out to that wide shot, and then pushing it into that close-up, you're so effortlessly brought from one element to the next, and so beautifully brought into that story, brought into that point of view once again, and allowed to experience that story from an even more empathetic place. And there's a dinner scene in Bridge of Spies which so perfectly encapsulates everything that I'm talking about as far as that blocking and that framing. But on top of that, another thing that Spielberg's so brilliant at doing, and again allows you to walk away having a specific memory about a specific scene, is making his films almost tactile. Like you can almost reach out and taste or touch what's being presented on screen. So it would be something as visceral as feet crushing dropped flashbulbs, or a character walking through a downpour and really feeling the cold of that, or cyclists zzz, zzz by in an empty hallway. And ultimately you walk away from that scene with that specific sound, or that specific image, or that specific feeling attached to all that dialogue, and allowing you to parse through it and remember it so much more. And of course, for a film that, as I mentioned, was probably 90% dialogue, I really have to compliment the writers, not just on delivering some really excellent dramatic dialogue, but also integrating some really funny comedic moments that brought a great balance to the overall tone and the overall piece. Tom Hanks absolutely led the way with a phenomenal everyman performance, though it is funny because I know Tom Hanks will always turn in a great performance. I actually do kind of put him under a microscope and kind of scrutinize that performance a little bit more, and ask him to do one or two things that will set the performance apart from the ones that have come before. And with James B. Donovan, that was actually just the placement of a smile. And what that smile told me was this character is not a completely Capra-esque Boy Scout. And this review would not be complete if I didn't at least highly praise Mark Rylance and his beautiful portrayal of Rudolph Abel. Every single time he was on screen, I was completely enraptured in what was happening because of these really subtle, unique acting choices that he was making. And actually, the relationship between Donovan and him was actually kind of a paradigm for the picture as a whole, because while I was simultaneously watching the relationship unfold as well as a narrative, I was actually asking the same question about both. That being, is Spielberg presenting me with enough to latch onto and actually identify and believe in this relationship and believe in these conflicts and to stay engaged as fully as I wanted to? And it was actually quite an interesting experience as I got closer to the end of the film. And don't worry, not going to spoil anything here, but as I got closer to the story wrapping up, I actually had a conscious thought while sitting in the theater, which was, man, I wish I had just a few more scenes between Donovan and Abel, allowing me to further invest in the relationship and believe in the reality of that friendship. And even as I was having that thought, the pair of them meet up again. I felt something, a genuineness and a reality to that relationship. And it was just this beautiful reminder that Spielberg had so precisely and carefully been laying the stones to allow me to step to that place in this film without me even knowing it. I knew a master was at work, someone who was pulling the strings in a way that even I, as an avid film viewer, couldn't necessarily recognize in the moment. And speaking of that last scene, I just love the fact that in the end, it all really kind of came down to just waiting for a phone call and waiting to hear from someone. And in the hands of a lesser director, that would be the death of a film. Wait, the entire film built to this? What's happening? But in the hands of Spielberg, someone who is in love with making the audience wait, in love with the idea that as they wait, they theorize and they invest all the more in the story and get lost all the more in this narrative. And that really is kind of leading me to my final positive point that I wanted to talk about today, which is I love the fact that The Bridge of Spies really does fit nicely next to all these other Spielberg films thematically. And it's really great to hear Spielberg himself talk about going to foreign countries and loving to impress on his films there, and really enjoying that moment between when he's given an answer to the press and when the translator's translating that answer, and being able to kind of just watch the people's faces as they wait and as they react to what he's saying, and how that little antidote plays directly into Munich, The Terminal, War of the Worlds, The Color Purple, Amistad, Schindler's List, and on Bridge of Spies is the fact that Spielberg is really in love with the theme of communication and how important communication is. And this theme really does go back as far as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where in that final scene we literally see alien and human harmonizing with one another. And in extension, Spielberg saying, if we can communicate with and get along with aliens, why can't we communicate and get along with one another? And even though Spielberg does kind of look at that same theme time and again, film to film, it is beautiful to see how he uses slightly different paintbrushes each time and a few different colors and paints on a slightly different canvas, which allows us as an audience to appreciate that idea from a different perspective and kind of take away one or two new things and tuck them away in our mental filing cabinet. And I know for myself, I will constantly reopen that filing cabinet, not only because the ideas are interesting, but because they're presented in such a beautiful and interesting way and presented from such a unique point of view, which makes Spielberg, Spielberg. So with all that said, I will wholeheartedly give Bridge of Spies 4 out of 5. I highly recommend this film. I really, really did enjoy it. I would still love to know what you guys think though, so please comment below. Let me know what images stuck out in your mind, which conversation scenes were your favorite, what do you think of the acting, are you in love with Spielberg as much as I am, can you not stand him? Please comment below, let me know. Also, please do subscribe. I will continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you all to stay up to date with all those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.